this episode, we take a topic that many new learners expect to be dry and bureaucratic and turn it into something much more practical and useful. Governance, risk, and compliance, GRC, can sound like a pile of meetings, documents, approvals, and checklists, but at its best it is really about helping an organization make responsible decisions, reduce confusion, and keep security work connected to what the business is actually trying to achieve. That matters because security programs do not succeed just by collecting tools or reacting to incidents. They need direction, prioritization, accountability, and evidence that important responsibilities are being handled consistently over time. When beginners first hear GRC, they sometimes imagine it as a side function that slows everything down. A better way to think about it is as the planning discipline that helps organizations decide what matters, who is responsible, what risks need attention, and how to show that important expectations are being met in a way people can actually follow. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is part of our companion study series. The first book is a detailed study guide that explains the exam and helps you prepare for it with confidence. The second is a Kindle-only ebook with 1,000 flashcards you can use on your mobile device or Kindle for quick review. You can find both at Cyber.Me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good place to begin is with the idea of purpose, because GRC only makes sense when you understand what it is supposed to serve. Governance gives direction, risk management helps prioritize uncertainty and potential harm, and compliance helps the organization meet required obligations and prove that it is taking those obligations seriously. If those three areas are treated as disconnected chores, the result is often wasted effort, repeated work, confused ownership, and a lot of activity that does not improve security very much. When they are planned together with purpose, they become much more powerful. Governance helps leaders decide what the organization expects and values. Risk helps the organization focus attention where harm is most meaningful. Compliance helps ensure that laws, regulations, contracts, policies, and standards are being respected rather than assumed. For a beginner, this is a useful shift because it turns GRC from a formal-sounding label into a practical system for aligning security decisions with mission, accountability, and real-world obligations. Governance sits at the top of that planning picture because it answers questions about direction, authority, and ownership. It tells the organization who makes decisions, what priorities matter most, how responsibilities are assigned, and how security expectations are set and reviewed. Without governance, risk discussions can become scattered because no one is sure who should decide what to accept, what to fund, or what to change. Compliance efforts can also become inconsistent because teams may interpret requirements differently or assume someone else is in charge. Governance creates structure so that security is not left to chance, personality, or the loudest voice in the room. For a beginner, the practical meaning of governance is simple. Someone needs to decide the rules, approve the priorities, assign the owners, and review whether the program is doing what it claims to be doing. Good governance does not require endless hierarchy. It requires enough clarity that important decisions are not drifting through the organization without clear responsibility or review. Risk planning brings focus to that structure by helping the organization decide where effort should go first and why. New learners sometimes assume every security issue should receive the same energy, but real organizations do not have unlimited time or resources, which means they need a practical way to sort urgent matters from less urgent ones. Risk planning helps with that by identifying what assets, services, data, and processes matter most, what could threaten them, how serious the impact might be, and what response is most reasonable. That is what gives the planning process shape. Instead of saying everything matters equally, the organization can say these are the areas where harm would be greatest, these are the gaps that most deserve attention, and these are the actions that support the mission most effectively. When beginners understand this, they stop imagining GRC as paperwork for its own sake. They begin seeing it as a disciplined way to keep security work connected to consequences, priorities, and decision-making instead of simply reacting to whatever sounds alarming in the moment. Compliance adds another layer of purpose by asking whether the organization is meeting the expectations placed on it from outside and inside the business. These expectations can come from laws, regulations, contracts, industry obligations, internal policies, and adopted standards. Compliance is often misunderstood as doing work only for auditors or regulators, but that is much too narrow. At its best, compliance helps the organization turn required obligations into repeatable practices that reduce confusion and make responsible behavior more consistent. For example, if the organization is required to protect certain kinds of information, report certain events, retain records for certain periods, or restrict certain types of access, compliance work helps make sure those expectations are not living only in a document that no one reads. For a beginner, the key point is that compliance gives security work a visible standard of accountability. It asks not only whether the organization believes it is being careful, but whether it can show that it is meeting defined expectations in a way that can be reviewed, explained, and repeated. When governance, risk, and compliance are planned well, they reinforce each other instead of competing for attention. Governance decides direction and ownership. Risk helps prioritize action, and compliance helps confirm that the organization is meeting the obligations it cannot ignore. If any one of those pieces is weak, the others become harder to manage. Strong governance without risk planning can produce lots of rules without clear priority. Strong risk planning without governance can produce good analysis without clear decision makers to act on it. Strong compliance activity without either of the other two can produce a box-checking culture where people collect evidence but do not improve the things that matter most. This is why GRC works best as one connected planning discipline rather than three separate silos. For beginners, that connection matters because it shows that security planning is not only about identifying bad things. It is about creating a stable system where expectations, priorities, and evidence all support one another in a way the organization can actually sustain over time. A very practical way to think about planning in GRC is to imagine that the organization is building a map, a calendar, and a set of shared records all at once. The map shows what matters, who owns it, what rules apply, and where the major risks live. The calendar shows what must be reviewed, when actions are due, when attestations or audits occur, and how recurring responsibilities are kept from being forgotten. The shared records show what decisions were made, what controls exist, what exceptions were approved, what issues remain open, and how progress is being tracked. Beginners often assume planning means creating one big master document and then hoping everyone follows it. In practice, good planning is more distributed and more alive than that. It relies on several simple but useful tools that help people stay organized, communicate clearly, and make responsible decisions without starting from scratch every time a question or issue appears. One of the most useful practical tools is an inventory, because planning gets much harder when the organization does not have a clear picture of what it owns, what information it handles, what systems it depends on, or what policies and controls it claims to have in place. An asset inventory helps identify important systems and data. A policy library helps people find the rules they are expected to follow. A control inventory helps the organization understand what safeguards are already in place and where gaps may still exist. These sound basic, but they are powerful because confusion thrives in environments where no one has a reliable list of what matters. Beginners should hear this clearly because security planning often breaks down before any advanced analysis occurs. If the organization cannot confidently identify its critical systems, sensitive information, supporting vendors, or required policies, then governance will be blurry, risk discussions will be incomplete, and compliance evidence will be harder to organize. Good inventories do not solve every problem, but they create the shared visibility that makes later decisions much more grounded. Another important tool is the risk register, which is essentially a structured record of known risks, their context, their owners, their current status, and the chosen response or next step. A risk register helps keep concerns from floating around as hallway conversations, scattered notes, or fading memories. It gives the organization one place to document what the risk is, what could happen, why it matters, who is responsible for it, and whether it is being reduced, accepted, monitored, or escalated. For a beginner, the real value of a risk register is not its format. The real value is that it turns vague concern into accountable visibility. Once a risk is written down clearly, it becomes easier to discuss it with leadership, compare it to other risks, revisit it over time, and avoid the common organizational habit of rediscovering the same problem repeatedly without ever assigning true ownership. A risk register is therefore not just a record of danger. It is a planning tool that helps the organization remember, prioritize, communicate, and act. Compliance planning also benefits from practical tools that help track obligations and evidence in a sane way. A control matrix or obligation map can help the organization connect requirements to actual safeguards, owners, and review activities. An issue log can help track problems that were found through assessment, audit, or day-to-day operations so that they do not disappear once the meeting ends. An exception register can document cases where the organization knowingly allows something outside the normal rule set for a limited reason and time, along with who approved it and when it must be reviewed again. These tools matter because compliance is rarely about a single event. It is an ongoing effort to show that expectations have been translated into actual practice and that deviations are visible rather than hidden. For beginners, this should be reassuring rather than intimidating. The point is not to create paperwork for its own sake. The point is to create enough traceable structure that important obligations, issues, and decisions do not depend entirely on personal memory or private email chains. Planning also improves when roles and responsibilities are made visible. A simple responsibility matrix or ownership chart can do a great deal of good because many GRC problems are really ownership problems in disguise. A policy exists, but no one knows who reviews it. A control is in place, but no one knows who validates whether it still works. A risk is known, but no one knows who can accept it or fund a response. A compliance requirement applies, but different teams assume someone else is handling it. Clear ownership reduces that drift. For beginners, this is one of the most practical lessons in the topic because it shows that strong security planning is often less about cleverness and more about clarity. When ownership is explicit, work is easier to assign, escalate, review, and measure. When ownership is vague, even smart people can spend months stepping around the same problem because everyone believes it belongs to someone else. Good GRC planning makes those responsibilities visible before confusion turns into delay or avoidable risk. Review cycles are another practical tool that give planning a rhythm instead of leaving it as a one-time project. Policies should be reviewed periodically so they remain relevant. Risks should be revisited because business priorities, systems, and threats change over time. Controls should be tested or validated so the organization is not relying on assumptions. Exceptions should expire or be reproved rather than becoming permanent by neglect. Training and awareness activities may need refresh cycles so expectations do not fade. A beginner should picture this as the calendar side of GRC, where important responsibilities are not trusted to chance. This matters because even strong programs weaken when review is irregular and dependent on whoever happens to remember. A good review cycle does not make the organization perfect, but it gives important security work a heartbeat. It ensures that governance remains active, risk remains visible, and compliance remains connected to current practice rather than being frozen in documents that no longer reflect how the environment actually works. Communication is just as important as documentation, because a beautifully organized program still fails if the right people do not understand what they are responsible for and why it matters. Leaders need clear summaries of major risks, decisions, and obligations. Operational teams need practical guidance on what actions they must take and what evidence they should maintain. Employees need understandable policies and awareness that connect security expectations to their daily work. Auditors or reviewers may need structured evidence showing how controls, issues, and exceptions are being handled. For beginners, this is an important reminder that GRC is not a silent filing cabinet function. It is a communication discipline as much as a documentation discipline. The purpose of its tools is not simply to store information. The purpose is to make sure the right people can see the right information in the right form so decisions, follow through, and accountability do not break down between leadership, operations, and oversight. It is also worth hearing that practical tools only help when they serve real purpose. Organizations sometimes create too many forms, too many trackers, too many approval steps, and too many disconnected records, which can turn GRC into the exact bureaucracy that beginners fear. The solution is not to abandon structure. The solution is to build simple tools that answer real questions. What are our important assets and obligations? What risks matter most? What controls are supposed to exist? What issues remain open? Who owns this decision? When is the next review? If a tool does not help answer questions like these, it may be adding friction without adding clarity. For a beginner, this is one of the healthiest ways to understand the title of this episode. Practical tools are not impressive because they are complicated. They are useful because they help the organization make better decisions, remember what matters, prove what was done, and keep important work moving without unnecessary confusion. As your understanding grows, you begin to see that GRC planning is really about helping an organization act on purpose instead of by accident. Governance makes sure direction and authority are clear. Risk planning makes sure effort is prioritized where it matters most. Compliance planning makes sure obligations are visible and translated into real practice. Practical tools such as inventories, risk registers, control maps, issue logs, exception records, ownership charts, and review calendars help turn those ideas into repeatable work. None of this eliminates uncertainty, and none of it replaces technical security measures. What it does is give security work a stable management structure so that decisions are clearer, responsibilities are traceable, and important promises do not vanish into good intentions. For brand new learners, that is the real value of GRC. It is not a decorative layer sitting on top of cybersecurity. It is the planning discipline that helps security become organized, accountable, and sustainable enough to support real operations over time. As we close, remember that planning governance, risk, and compliance with purpose means focusing on why the work exists before getting lost in documents and process. The goal is to guide the organization, prioritize its exposure, meet its obligations, and support trustworthy operations through clarity and follow-through. Governance gives direction and ownership. Risk gives focus and priority. Compliance gives accountable proof that important expectations are being met. Practical tools make all of that manageable by helping the organization see what it has, record what matters, assign who is responsible, track what remains unresolved, and revisit key decisions on a predictable rhythm. When those parts work together, GRC stops feeling like paperwork and starts feeling like good organizational judgment made visible. That is exactly why this topic matters so much for beginners. It teaches that strong security is not only about reacting to problems. It is also about planning with enough purpose and structure that the organization can act responsibly before small weaknesses turn into larger failures.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.